This is one of the scariest chases in horror history. This is true fear. And this is Jess Paul. Horror is one of the most versatile genres in cinema. It can be grossly gory, edge of the cliff suspenseful, or stupid ridiculous. You can make a box office hit on a multi-million-dollar budget, or for less money than you'd pay for a used car. And even though the genre has been saturated by both professional and independent filmmakers because of the comparative ease of making a horror film paired with a perpetually hungry and zealous worldwide audience, there still seem to be new scare devices and folklore concepts spilling your popcorn every year. That said, I love a good scare. I stan a new ghost story. And the horror movies I have enjoyed, well, I can't stop thinking about. Seriously, it's a problem. I have a sleep disorder. Here are 3 mainstream horror films that I feel do not get enough credit, even though many people have probably talked about them. My first movie sealed the spooky deal for me as soon as I saw the trailer. Directed and written by Andy Muschietti, Mama is a fantastical and macabre ghost story based on an equally creepy short that deserved a feature, IMO. Annabelle and Lucas, or Jessica Chastain and Nikolaj Coster-Waldau, or Beverly Marsh and Jamie Lannister, take in their 2 young nieces, Victoria and Lily, after years of searching since the girls were abandoned by their father in a rundown house, apparently subsisting on wild cherries for a half-decade. But besides the cherries, how did these young children survive? Well, unlike a lot of very standard horror plots where characters go somewhere to find a ghost, this one was mistakenly invited into the family as Mama continues to take care of the 2 little girls she's been fostering. The first unique aspect that I love to extol about this movie are the devices that help to hide our monster. Like a nice subset of horror fans, I see you guys out there, I believe that the unseen foe can often be a much scarier monster than the one we can see. Our imaginations are the biggest monsters. I know I have a sleeping disorder. Not that Mama at face value isn't terrifying herself, but the film engaged in multiple fun tricks to build the suspense and keep us from getting a full glimpse of our ghost, from strobing photo flashbulbs to our ghost floating just out of frame, to ethereal CGI that covers Mama's face like she's floating in water, which is a gorgeous theme that is reflected in executive producer Guillermo del Toro's other projects like The Devil's Backbone, which I haven't seen yet. Should have seen that before I did this list. But besides obscuring our monster, let's talk about that monster herself. Mama's look and movements are some of the creepiest to date, helped by actor Javier Botet's rare genetic condition. Marfan syndrome is one that can cause a patient to grow extremely tall and long, like Botet standing at 6.5 feet tall, while he only clocks in at a mere 120 pounds. This was one of Botet's earliest of many super creepy monsters he brought to life. This natural spindliness paired with the unsettling makeup and CGI that went into the character was combining 2 things that humans have a primitive and innate aversion to: dissymmetry and spiders. What Mama does well is that while it facilitates some extremely visually stimulating horror, those devices are also backed up with an engaging and particular ghost lore that adds depth and sorrow to the actual story. Mama's twisted face and willowy limbs reflect the film's themes of decay over time. Instead of a murder victim coming back as a ghost with a fresh wound like their spirit was frozen upon death, the character design of Mama reflected not only what can happen to a dead body being left to the elements over decades, but it symbolized how a soul can be gnarled by revenge, sorrow, and displaced, unfinished biznatch. But besides this eerie trans-veil relationship between Mama and the girls, the final feature I love about this film is the care it took with the underlying non-horror plot. This is a story about family. This is a story about becoming a family or finding a family in less than obvious places and scenarios. I believe Jessica Chastain's Annabelle character was a beautiful contrast to the supernatural antagonist. Her punk rock, left of center, not ready to be a mom demeanor made her uniquely open to the outcasts that were Lily and Victoria. One trope that I'm constantly annoyed with when it comes to horror movies are parents or guardians not understanding or believing that their kids are experiencing something possibly paranormal to a degree in which the parents are practically negligent. If we're to believe that the stats at the beginning of celeb ghost stories, quick math, 38% of people believe in ghosts, that's disregarding all the rest of the people who at least know what ghosts are. Why do no parents think this is possible? Not that this was the ticklingly fun embrace of supernatural entities like in Poltergeist, which is the main reason that classic stands out to me in horror history, but it took a look at some more nuanced characters and characteristics than what could have been a more boring and staple take on the family unit. I feel like everyone I've ever talked to about this next film has an opinion on it. Often, they brush it off as an over-Hollywoodized execution of what is one of the most famous, arguably real, paranormal cases in American history. I do believe it's true, by the way. The Haunting in Connecticut was directly inspired by the documented Ed and Lorraine Warren case that followed a teen struggling with the possible hallucinogenic effects of experimental cancer treatment. He might have been early 20s, teen, something like that. Now, there are countless documentaries and exposés produced about this story before and after the Hollywood film, so suffice it to say, expectations were high and preferences on how this story should be portrayed were already set in stone before release date even rolled around. The plot includes the family buying this beautiful old house and moving in because it was closer to son Matt's cancer hospital. And of course, they grab the house for such a questionably low price. That reason being that it used to be a funeral home where, as the plot unwraps, some less than savory offenses were being done to the corpses. But along with the focus on hallucinogenic bugs and basement nightmare sequences, the subject of post-mortem photography played a big, nice role in the creep factor of the plot. Even when there's no supernatural elements to it, death photography is something that I, to this day, find so unnerving. I think what creeps me out the most is that there was a time not too long ago where people were cool with keeping a body around for a nice length of time, let alone pose with it for the uncomfortable several minutes that the earliest cameras needed to take a still photo. I know what you want to say, but Jess, it wasn't just a body, it was someone's mother, grandfather, or baby. I know, I have dead family. But I counter with the way that I feel when I go to any funeral or viewing, even if it's for somebody I know or not, that I will without fail always approach a casket with the suspense that shell of a person will open their eyes and or sit up. I acknowledge that this is turning into more of a me problem now though. But vintagey death photography, seance culture, and the spirituality movement are subjects that I am incredibly attracted to, on top of a great spooky tale and fantastic cast of characters, which is the last but possibly the most pivotal compliment I want to pay to this movie. Let's talk specifically about Kyle Gallner for a second. Around the time of filming, the young actor was a rising Hollywood star when he played the film's disturbed protagonist, and he was particularly good at playing various shades of troubled youth, like in Jennifer's Body, which released in the same year as Connecticut. But even a decade ago, the actor was incredibly apt at portraying the angst and turmoil that his teen roles required of him, at the same time being able to inject unquestionable realism and relatability into his line delivery and character building. I was lucky enough to meet Gallner in Sundance when both his film Dear White People and My Immaculate Reception were in the fest, and I got to compliment him, which he probably does not remember in the very short conversation we had on how much I loved him in this film, despite not a whole lot of horror fans seeming to like it. I even think that I said something along the lines of, I don't care what anyone else thinks. But dude was sweet and gracious. And then years later, I met one of the producers of this film on Facebook and got to pay him the same respect. It's a small, weird world that we're living in. The last thing I'll say about this movie is eyelids. That's all I'll say. Watch the movie. My last pick for this list might be the one that has horror fanatics rolling their eyes the hardest, because this franchise is so well known and so well talked about and possibly derivative of itself, but I'm here to defend it, and it is Paranormal Activity, the third one to be exact. Spoiler alert, I love a good found footage horror. Over many mediums of narrative entertainment, I have this obsession with finding where crazy, fun, outlandish, supernatural scenarios meet unwavering realism and believability. When a scripted movie or show is filmed in either a reality setting or a faux documentary style, writers and actors are forced to seem more genuine and unscripted than the decades of super tropey plots, repeated lines that no one says in real life, and overacting in the face of fake monsters. And I truly believe the Paranormal Activities should get credit for this, for most of their actors and writing. What is also super fun about the Paranormal Activities is that with each sequel they got to experiment with developing technology to create a fresh palette of scares. But my favorite example of cinematic inventiveness comes from the movie set 20 years in the past. Okay, Paranormal Activity 3. Paranormal Activity 3 is the one where sisters Katie and Christy are children, presented through their home movies, captured by their wedding videographer, stepdad. So, advanced audiovisual technology wasn't necessarily a part of this one, but what they lacked in ghost dimension, they made up for in some very unique suspense devices. 2 words: oscillating fan camera. Oscillating fan camera, 3 words. This mind-blowing, at least to me, cinematography device was one of the most creative yet simple tactics to slowly draw out what was already established as a found footage staple of watch the screen closely in heart-squeezing silence until something moves. With every slow ebb of this standard oscillating fan that Dennis duct-taped his huge 80s model movie camera to, I was holding my breath to see what was just beyond the edge of the screen, slowly coming up next. For the whole scene, for multiple scenes, that's a lot of oxygen loss to my brain. But what I love most about this tactic is that it wasn't expensive. It wasn't CGI laden or difficult to execute. It was just smart. Very reflective of what the original Paranormal Activity was so good at. Using our own expectations of time, pace, and reality to leave us sitting on the edge of our seats. When I was making this top 3 list, I kept swapping out other films, including lesser-known gems, that I think also break the mold, the bloody, gory special effects silicone mold. And if you want more of these kinds of lists, well, you're gonna have to just let me know. Vlog. Great. Maybe I will have one, now that I think of it. As for my social seance this week, oh, how appropriate. I asked you on my Insta, Twitter, and Facebook, literally, as I was writing this essay, if you want to be part of my social seance, go follow. What big blockbuster horror movie actually lived up to their hype and impressed you? Lance Parkin said Hereditary. I think a lot of people would agree with you, Lance Parkin. It was one of the most popular horror movies in the last 5 years. Swigmun says, I know it's not a horror movie, but wanted to tell you that being home alone in Millville, windows opened, Dead of Night. Cape Fear creeped the hell out of me. De Niro. I have never seen Cape Fear, so it's now at the top of my list. On Facebook, Newt says, Drag Me to Hell was weirdly overlooked, IMO. It's weird and funny and gross and surprisingly bleak at times. It also got way less love from horror fans, given it's a distinctly Sam Raimi film. Sayanta says, The Exorcist. I remember I couldn't sleep properly for 1 week after watching it. That was really all of our first terrifyingly creepy experience, wasn't it, actually? If I really do go back into time to tell you what the first biggest nemesis of my nightmares was, it actually was the leprechaun. I'm not kidding you. This is true. I was 7 years old. My mom, for some reason, got us, I was the oldest kid, the Leprechaun movie as a VHS. I remember looking at the cover and thinking, oh, that doesn't look good. And she, for some reason, just didn't read the back or something. Nightmares for the rest of my childhood. And Guthrie says, definition of horror, big budget, blockbuster, successful or funded. Guthrie, just, you're keeping us in suspense. If you'd like to see the most compelling piece of paranormal photography I've ever personally captured, I'll show you right here, and I'll pit all of my best and worst Halloween costumes against each other while carving a tiny pumpkin right here. Wherever you are, whoever you are, I'm grateful that you spent the last few minutes listening to and looking at me, and this is my outro.